In Uganda, troops of the Tanzanian army, a key force in East African politics. There are still a few thousand of them here, all that remains of the 45,000-strong force which drove out President Amin 2 years ago. They've helped prop up the regimes that have succeeded Amin. Now the last of them are going, waiting for transport on their way out. They'll all be gone in the next few weeks. So how will Uganda manage now? It'll be a testing time, for even with the Tanzanian presence, the Ugandan people have faced massive problems. Problems of internal security, guerrillas threatening violence in outlying areas, and economic hardship also, an economy that's never really recovered from the chaos of Amin's 8-year rule. Leading Uganda today is President Milton Obote. It was he who lost power to Amin in 1971. He's been president now for only 5 months, but he says Uganda can get along without Tanzanian troops. The Tanzanians first intervened in Uganda 2 years ago. Then they forced their way over the border into Uganda's capital, Kampala, bringing with them Ugandan exiles hostile to Amin. Amin had never got along well with neighboring Tanzania. Now he was to reap the bitter fruit of his antagonism toward that country. As they moved through Kampala, the Tanzanians were greeted as liberators. The much-hated Amin regime had fallen. The invaders swept through the country, clearing the last pockets of resistance. On the back of the Tanzanians' military power rode a coalition of exile groups organized into the Uganda National Liberation Front. Ugandans felt they could look forward to a new era in their country's history. But now Tanzanian President Nyerere is insisting his troops pull out. Tanzania isn't rich, and it's expensive to keep troops in Uganda. The Ugandans can no longer afford to pay for their presence. The Tanzanian withdrawal is bad news for this country. For after Amin's defeat, the hopes for political stability never materialized. Today, President Obote is the third Ugandan ruler since Amin. So now that Tanzanian troops are leaving, it's more vital than ever that Uganda should achieve political maturity. A first step in the advance to an ordered democracy came last December with the first general elections to be held in Uganda for 18 years. Then Obote seemed the only politician able to unite the country. But his opponents still condemn the success of his Ugandan People's Congress Party. An Obote supporter, Paulo Muwanga, personally intervened to supervise much of the election count. Some said that meant the elections were rigged, though Commonwealth observers disagreed. Today, Paulo Muwanga, on the right, is vice president and defense minister. Many say he has the real clout in Uganda, though it's doubtful he has the tribal support needed to bid for power. Critics claim Muwanga may now be trying to distance himself from Obote as problems mount for the present government. But as yet, there's little evidence that Obote's support is being eroded. Obote himself has always denied that threat.
I'm the president of Uganda. I'm the president of the UPC. I'm the one who appointed Paul Muwanga. I'm not a figurehead. I'm an executive president, both of my party and of Uganda.
But there's no denying the threats to the security situation. The Tanzanians have been handing over to the Uganda National Liberation Army. From now on, they'll have to keep the peace. But this rapidly recruited force is ill-trained and unpopular. They've been accused of robbing, murdering, and harassing civilians. So now the troops have returned to their barracks for training and discipline. Some have been arrested, some discharged. The government can't even afford uniforms for all its soldiers. We asked President Obote, is the army itself a source of insecurity?
All sorts of people say all sorts of things. Right from the beginning, they started saying that Uganda army was no good, when in fact Uganda had no army. So I'm not responsible for what they say.
Do you yourself worry about the behavior of soldiers here?
I'm saying I'm not responsible for what other people say. They can go on imagining things in their own minds. They know fully well that a war has taken place in this country. They know fully well that for nearly 9 years, this country was ruled by nothing but guns and gangsters. And these guns are around in the countryside. They know that the military uniform has been in the hands of all kinds of people, criminals and otherwise. And these people are using these weapons and these uniforms.
With training, the army may re-emerge in the future as a potent and organized force for internal security. But the officer here is Tanzanian. When he leaves, who'll replace him? The need for an efficient security force is more vital than ever. Exiled underground movements have launched guerrilla attacks from Kenya to destabilize the Obote regime. Press reports may have exaggerated that guerrilla violence, and some Tanzanian troops have patrolled unarmed. But how will the ill-disciplined and poorly equipped Ugandan army cope with former Amin supporters who've returned from exile to settle in the West? Obote's policy now is to transfer internal security duties away from the army.
Do you think there's any likelihood that the sorts of security problems that we've been having will increase now that the Tanzanians are pulling out?
I don't see much of a security problem affecting the army as such. I think the Ugandan security problem, right from the time of liberation, was mismanaged by the governments which was here. From the beginning, much of this security problem should have been entrusted with the police, and that's what I'm trying to do.
The better organized police are now certainly taking a wider role. They now man most roadblocks. The soldiers who used to handle this were often accused of rudeness and arbitrary violence. There's further evidence the police role in Uganda is expanding. At this police college, the UN has set up a special program. An officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police teaches Ugandans how to be police instructors. Such programs are badly needed here. A shortage of trained police investigators has made it impossible to try or even charge the 1,000 former Amin supporters now held in Uganda's overcrowded prisons. The jails have been so full that Obote recently released 3,000 detainees, including many of the former Amin men. And yet this drilling and marching is an indication of growing police efficiency. The opposition Democratic Party claims many of its prominent members have been arrested. Obote says everybody detained will face trial, unlike in the past. His problem is to conserve the democratic process amid a situation of insecurity and extremism. In his recent budget speech, he confirmed his commitment to democratic principles.
I would like to reaffirm the commitment made on behalf of the UPC in the joint declaration by the leaders of all the political parties that participated in the recent general elections. And I quote, "For us to embark successfully on the process of rebuilding and revitalizing our nation, all of us recognize as essential our party's commitment to the democratic process."
And yet the jails have been filling because of the extent of corruption and crime, arbitrary murders, but also smuggling and widespread black market operations. a black market that's flourished in a country where shortages are endemic. This is the most immediate effect of the disaster-struck economy. In Uganda today, it's even hard to find soap. This market seems busy enough. But until recently, even coffee, Uganda's major export crop, was controlled primarily by black market operators. And that's not all. Vital services here, like transport, just aren't working. There's been heavy gasoline rationing. Now, just when the oil shortage seemed to be easing, when some new buses were back on the roads, a crippling blow has hit the government. The recent decision by several oil companies to halt oil deliveries to Uganda. That's because of high outstanding debts. Uganda's practically bankrupt. Among other shortages, there's not enough foreign exchange, and that means there's no financing for even essential imports. With continued instability in the last 2 years, it's been impossible to rebuild Uganda's economic infrastructure. And yet some of the business-minded Asians expelled by Amin are back and trading. There's renewed foreign investment. This year's cash crop should be large. And Obote claims Uganda will produce all the food it needs within 3 years. There could be a grave problem, though. The crops in Uganda's northern Karamoja province have failed, and that means last year's famine there could be repeated. To encourage development of a depressed economy, President Obote's budget speech called for the floating of Uganda's currency.
The shilling will be allowed to find its own level.
That provoked laughter and taunts from Obote's opponents. The president's election manifesto had socialist overtones. Now the opposition said he was coming around to their own free market viewpoint.
Just like a person requiring an operation has to undergo and bear the pains before and after the operation, Uganda has got to go through the same process. In the past and up to now, the fixed prices have only benefited a few people in our society, including magendoists, smugglers, and hoarders.
The morning after Obote's speech, the streets were unusually empty of those magendoists, the black marketeers. The day before, there were crowds of them here, but they were confused by the floating of the shilling. They no longer knew how much to charge. The black market and the lack of effective price control has hit Uganda's workers and peasants worst. Almost everyone here has a vegetable garden to help cut back on food costs. Joyce lives here with her children and sisters. Her husband was killed by Amin. Only Joyce has a job, earning 2,500 shillings a month. Yet the household eats 2,000 shillings worth of food in a week. Just a bunch of bananas, the staple food here, costs 800 shillings. A child's dress costs nearly a month's salary. The family chop firewood because other fuels are very expensive. But Joyce makes out. She has some cows and sells the milk. She also buys cosmetics through a connection in Kampala and sells them at highly inflated prices to shops in small towns. Such is the momentum of a black market economy. These people suffer from it, then have to perpetuate it themselves just to survive. As the Tanzanians embark then, the country they're leaving behind faces severe challenges in the months to come. If the problems, the shaky security, the stumbling economy, were to overcome the present government, no one knows who'd replace Obote. The official opposition is thought to be too moderate to launch a coup against a regime in difficulty. Former President Amin is himself taking it easy at a luxury hotel in Saudi Arabia. The guerrilla groups have yet to prove they can command widespread popular support. And that's true also for Vice President Mwanga, although he may yet have his say if Obote should falter. With the Tanzanians leaving, Uganda may have little to look forward to but another period of instability. Unrest it simply can't afford.